give a couple minutes. We're going to give just a couple minutes to see if more people hop on. But those of you, we have 18 attendees. So that's great so far. You guys get extra credit for jumping on early. I'm going to start the presentation, but again, we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. Can everybody see the screen just to be sure? Okay, thanks. And my Zoom controls went away, so I actually can't see attendees.
It should, the Zoom controls should have moved to the top of your screen, I believe.
Yeah, that's what it usually does. Let me try this again. So there's that. Gabby, you made it.
Nick of time with I-70 being closed.
Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, let me try this again. Okay, now it's there. May just be when I go into presentation mode. Okay, everyone can see the starting slide.
Yes.
Okay, great. And just whenever you guys think, if it looks like not many more people are joining in the attendee list, I can't see it. So
okay, we're up to 38 participants. A couple more just joined, so I think we should give it 2 more minutes.
okay.
This is great turnout. Kudos to Town of Minturn staff for drumming up the participation. And kudos to everyone that's joining. We're excited to have you. Let's see if we can hit that magic 40 participants, and then maybe we'll get started.
We're over 40.
Oh, us 41. So just for the other panelists, why don't we have a practice as soon as we get started that the person with the speaking role leaves their camera on, and then the rest of us go dark just to kind of, so the participants can focus on the person that's speaking. And that way, if you need to like take a bite of food or something over the next 2.5 hours, you can do that too. Okay, well, I think we should get started. What do you think, Janie? It's 4 past, almost 5 past.
Yeah, I think.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming to the Minturn 100 block design workshop. My name is Gabby Bowler. I'm with SE Group. We are the consulting firm. I'm part of the consulting firm that was chosen by the town of Minturn to do the community plan process. And this 100-block design process is somewhat an addition, and it's related to the comp plan. So we're taking a break from the comp plan to focus on the 100-block design guidelines and new code language. And then once we have this piece completed, we're going to hop back into the community plan process. So I hope that this piques your interest in that parallel project and very related project that looks at future land use, parks and recreation, transportation, zoning, housing, sustainability issues, water issues. It looks at issues from all different angles. So if you're here tonight for this charrette, I hope that you also continue to be involved in the community plan as we move forward with that. So our team is SE Group, and there's a few folks on tonight that you might hear from. And then Cheney from Studio Seed, who's going to be running the show for most of the rest of the meeting. And there's a few other firms as well, Fair and Peers helping with transportation issues, economic and planning systems helping with economics, and Tetra Tech helping with water and sewer. The town is also part of a downtown challenge studio, which is a really cool opportunity sponsored by DCI, also known as Downtown Colorado Inc. And they're going to help the town of Minturn also look at issues in the 100-block with architectural character and style. So we have some folks there from that organization here tonight, and this work will continue into the spring with a opportunity. It's almost like a workshop conference to continue to look at the town of Minturn downtown and get technical assistance with anything we might need. I will turn it over to you, Cheney. Oh,
Okay.
let me hold on. Let me go over the webinar rules real quick.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't see that slide. So this is a lot. So get ready, buckle your seatbelts, get some water, make sure you're ready for the next 2.5 hours. We are going to cover a lot of information. We have live polls. So we're going to talk about some content, and then we were in person with a public meeting where you get a chance to write in your comments. Instead, we're doing a live polling process where you are going to give us your feedback through answering the poll. We also have a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. It's 2 little bubbles, Q&A. Feel free to type in your questions throughout the whole process. You know, Cheney's going to be running through the workshop, but there's going to be a few other of us on the team answering those questions behind the scenes. If a bunch of people have a similar question, I might interrupt Cheney and have us all pause to talk about it. If there's something unclear or a bunch of people have the same question, we can do that. So we'll either answer the questions live at certain pause points, or we will type answers to the questions. So make sure you have that Q&A chat box open, not only so you can type in your own questions, but if you want to see the answers to other people's questions, you'll be able to do that as well. And there will be a couple points where we have audio discussion. So when those opportunities arise, you please use the raise hand function. It's at the bottom of the screen, or reminds me it's a bottom, depending on your settings, it might be at the top. It's a hand, it says raise hand. And then Madison from the town of Minturn will unmute people in order. Please be brief with your comments. We want to give everyone a chance to speak that wants to speak, and we also have a lot to cover. So if you're speaking too long, I might cut you off to keep things moving. Please don't take it personally. We're just trying to get through a lot of information and hear from a diverse array of voices. Anything I forgot, Jamie?
No, I think that's good. And then next we're going to have Michelle just say a few words about where we are with the historic preservation.
Great, thank you.
Hi, thanks everybody for joining us tonight. And thank you to all of those attendees who dealt with my spam emails today. I appreciate you joining. So we have had a historic preservation effort occurring since late November. We've had 2 committee meetings so far, and that committee is tasked with creating the ordinance, which will then comprise the Historic Preservation Commission. From there, the commission will go on and create design guidelines and all sorts of rules. We do not expect that to be in place with the commission's design guidelines before the moratorium's over, which is one of the reasons it's so important that we get through tonight's public feedback session. So if you have any questions about the historic preservation specifically, please feel free to go to minturn.org. We have a whole list of everything that team, amazing team, has been working on, including links to those videos for prior meetings that we've had. You can look at those and feel free to email and ask questions, as well as a copy of the draft ordinance. Thank you again.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. So let's get started with tonight, and just to give you an idea of what we're going to be working through today, I'll set up and go through a little bit of a more high level 100 block goals and priorities. And then we're going to workshop everything in dark black. So everything that's bolded, we will have lots of interactive participation opportunities. We're going to talk about future land use, specifically for the 100 block. We're going to talk about building height and scale and the feeling and scale of any new construction or infill. And again, think 20, 30 years out, right? This is part of the community plan, which is typically a vision of 20 plus years. And so we want you to have your long-term lens on when thinking through these critical issues. We'll take a break about halfway through, a little over halfway through, and then we'll come back and do more of the public side, so site design and public realm aspects and parking. And then we'll end with questions and discussion. So as I'm sure many of you are well aware, there's been a lot of activity in Minturn, just a lot of studies happening. And so the sentiment that we've got and the direction that we've got from the town is that they need real regulations in place. There's been enough studies done now that they want real direction. And so that's really what we're here for today, is to have, lots of participation. We're so excited to see this many of you participating, and it means a lot to the community. And so following this workshop, we will go into drafting some regulations and design guidelines for the 100 block. And so this has been a long time coming. A lot of this came out of the 2018 strategic plan. Updating the code has been a priority for the community. And then in the last 2 years, there have been a few studies. There was a transportation study that looked at circulation improvements. There was a 100 block charrette in 2020 that maybe many of you participated in. And that charrette really focused on more establishing kind of a vision for the 100 block and defining the character. So you'll see a lot of slides tonight where we're going to summarize what was said. We just want to make sure that we're still on the same page for that. And then in 2021, last year, the community plan update process started. The Historic Preservation Committee was pulled together, and there was an issued moratorium, which is essentially why we're here tonight. So it's so important to understand and get everyone on the same page about the future of the 100 block. The goals of tonight's workshop is to really discuss those key topics of concern with regards to future development, consider real alternatives for addressing those concerns while maintaining the character that everyone loves. We want to work with you all, the community, and 100 block business and property owners to figure out those solutions and then update the regulatory framework. So with the goal of by August, when the moratorium is lifted, the town will have in place some solid agreed upon regulations and guidelines. And then really tonight we want to, and we hope to educate you on some understanding some trade-offs and the impacts of decisions that will be made. So our first question to you tonight, these are some, just a list of priorities. We're asking you to pick your top 3. These are listed just in alphabetical order, to be fair. And so it's a list of items that, you know, just looking holistically at the 100 block and thinking 20 years from now, what improvements would you prioritize to reach that vision that you have in mind? So you can go ahead and release the poll, Madison. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to see that come up because I'm presenting, but those options are, you know, biking amenities, dedicated spaces for arts, public art, housing options, improved circulation, connectivity, river access, landscaping such as street trees, lawns and flower boxes, off-street parking, loading and drop-off zones, office and co-working space, public gathering space, shopping, dining and entertainment activities, and then sidewalk amenities like benches and lighting. So with that, I believe the poll should be live and you can select your top 3. And just let me know, I'm in presentation mode, so unfortunately I can't see when you release the results. Just let me know. And somebody, if you don't mind unmuting and verbally kind of telling us what the top choices are.
Yeah, absolutely. So right now we only have about 80% of the people have filled it out yet, so I haven't closed it yet. Figured I'd give everybody about 30 more seconds. And then I will close and release those results.
Great.
Madison, we might not get full participation in the voting, so at some point we have to kind of
Yeah,
figure out what our
absolutely.
threshold is and keep moving.
Okay, so I will end the poll and I will share the results. It looks like shopping, dining, and entertainment is number 1, with improved circulation, connectivity, river access, and landscaping tying at 2 and 3.
Okay, and just to compare, here is the results from 2020. My screen would move forward. We wanted to compare these results based on, here we go, what was said in the 2020 charrette. So I didn't tell you this, but this same question was asked in the 2020 charrette. And so these were the top 5 that came out of that charrette. And so if you can still see the results, you can kind of compare and contrast. I've got, so looks like landscaping was up there, public gathering spaces, and sidewalk amenities. Nope, that was 6. But anyway, there were a couple that were still up there in the top, but this gives us a good idea of to add to that list. So for the first half of the workshop, we're going to focus on land use and architecture. So in other words, what types of uses you want to see in the 100 block. And for architecture, we have a good sense of the preferred aesthetic from that 2020 charrette, which we'll confirm in a few minutes, but we really want to focus on scale and height for in terms of architecture so that we can write regulations based on that. So here on this slide is a picture of one of the things in the 2020 charrette that that group did was what we call a visual preference survey. And so they took a lot of photos of buildings in Minturn and they asked, how well does this building represent Minturn? And these were the results. These were the most liked by the participants of that workshop, and or the ones that they thought represented Minturn the best. And so, you know, common likes, commonalities here that we see are wood as a primary material, some accent colors, pitched roofs, everything's 1 to 3 stories, large windows, and minimal decoration. On the same exercise, these were the photos that ranked lower on the scale, in other words, not representing Minturn well. And so just looking here, commonalities, seeing some stucco, parking in front of buildings, solid colors, and lack of roof variation or complexity. And then this was summarized in the presentation. These are pulled directly from that 2020 charrette, but lumped into as they relate to land use and architecture. So what people said then was, you know, make sure and allow for eclectic architecture, that Minturn is such a pattern quilt, and that's what people love about it. They wanted to blend weathered traditional materials with vibrantly painted surfaces, including a mix of uses. So emphasizing retail and other active uses, especially on Main Street, ensuring new development occurs at a human scale, preserving existing historic and character-rich structures in the 100 block and build off of those characteristics, and then not creating monolithic structures that are out of keeping with the character. So the question here, we want to pause and again see, are we on the same page? So on a scale of 1 to 5, how well do you agree with these values? 1 being strongly agree and 5 being strongly disagree. And we just want to see on a scale of attendance tonight, do you still agree with these characteristics, these vision elements?
Okay, we're at about 50%. We're at about 75 now. %. I'll give you all about 10 more seconds and I'll close it. Okay. In poll, I am sharing the results. It does look like most of the people strongly agree or agree. 38% said strongly agree, while 31% said agree.
Great. Okay, so that's good to know that we are still generally as a population in agreement, and that gives us good direction. So next we're going to start looking at work through some scenarios for future land use. So again, imagine this map is showing existing conditions, and so you can see what downtown, what the 100 block is made up of today. Everything in red is strictly commercial, so only commercial uses, think retail, restaurants, things like that. Everything in purple is a mix of uses, so that includes, you know, it can include commercial, restaurants, and residential. Everything in blue is lodging, gray is vacant, and then yellow is residential only. And so that yellow area has an outline, a dashed line around it, because it is existing non-conforming. So basically the code today, the way it's written, says no residential is allowed by right. It's only a conditional use. And so, and really everything within even the purple having any residential use on a property today would have to go through a conditional use to get that approved. So that is the existing conditions. And so we want to look at a few options. We kind of have a question back to the community about just confirming that this is the right direction about not allowing residential. So we want to present a couple options that we see as potential opportunities for the future. So number one is leaving it as it is. And you'll see I've brought back up those pictures that people said, they liked and that represent Minturn. And everything highlighted in green is basically what you could rebuild today if under the existing rules. So these are all the, one-story commercial structures. Those could certainly be built. And then residential would be conditional use only. And so some of the pros to this approach is that you are mandating tax revenue uses on the ground floor. So you're getting those commercial uses and the tax benefit. Active street life, by requiring commercial uses, you're hopefully getting more active uses on the street and sidewalk. The trade-offs is that residential that may want to be located down in the 100 block would be pushed to other parts of town. Without much residential in a downtown, it can feel not as lively, and businesses could potentially suffer from not having those full-time residents within walking distance. So looking at a couple other options, here is another option for what if the future regulations allowed residential on upper floors, but not on the ground floor. And so everything in yellow in this diagram to the right would, the regulations would say, it has to be ground floor commercial, but you could put residential uses on the top. Again, comparing that with the 2020 survey, everything outlined in green now is what you could build under those scenarios. So, more of the mixed use here that you see down here. Hotel Minturn is a mix of uses, and then in addition to those one-story. So those could happen anywhere. Pros for this is that there's more activity for businesses, more eyes. When you have residents living in a central, your commercial core, there's more eyes on the street. It feels safer. There's a sense of ownership by those people. And when I say residential, I want to be clear because we work in a lot of mountain communities, and there we understand the concern with short-term rentals. And so when we say residential, we mean full-time residents. And so a third option might be, looking at patterns that are more closely resemble what's there. And so the diagram on the right would say, really, we know that focusing those ground floor commercial uses and having that activity, that more commercial activity, is really important for Main Street. But might you allow everything in green, so off of Main Street along Williams and Nelson, to be residential, and that would not preclude what's there today. It would allow everything that exists to be allowed. You get a diversity of uses, but this might not be desired. And so we just want to understand what your vision is for the future of the 100 block. Do you envision future residents there? And if so, where should they be located? I want to also point out that both of these past scenarios would not preclude a full commercial structure from being built either. So we have three options here. The first one is keep the rule as it is, where residential is a conditional use and only on the second floor. That's what the existing regulations say. The second option would be residential is not allowed on the ground floors, but allowed on upper floors everywhere in the 100 block. And the third option here on the screen is to residential is not allowed on the ground floor fronting Main Street, but it is allowed everywhere else in green. So we have another poll to enter, and take your time. I know this can be a little confusing, and hopefully we spelled it out enough for you to understand and be able to make an educated choice. You know, we really want to understand if residential should be allowed, and if so, where.
Janie, I think we have a question that I want to make sure we have a nuanced answer to. Someone, Krista Driscoll, just asked, would these options have any impact on current residential structures? And Michelle answered that current residential would be grandfathered in, but the real answer is that it would really only be grandfathered in to a certain extent. So, you know, no one's going to come knock on anybody's door and say, okay, the code changed, or as the code is now, you can't have a single family home or residence here. But it basically, if the code stays not allowing residential and you have a residential structure, it's going to be hard to modify that residential structure, like make an addition or change the use over time, or when there's a switch of ownership, you know, someone sells a house to another person, you know, getting that permit to keep it as residential or turn it into something else. So I just want to make sure, and Cheney, if you want to add to that at all, it's a kind of a nuanced answer, like things are only grandfathered into a certain extent, depending on where the code ends up for the 100 block residential allowances.
Yep.
So I hope, Krista, that helps helps answer your question, and I'm sure other folks had that question too.
Okay, it looks like we have about 75% of people have answered. So I'll give everybody about 30 more seconds and then call it good. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. I am sharing the results. It looks like number 3 is the winner at 51% choosing it. And the runner-up is number 1 with 30% of people choosing that.
Okay, so a little bit of variation. We have a few mixed opinions here tonight, which is no surprise. That's why we're here. So that's good feedback. Okay, so we're gonna move on now and go into building height. And so this is where we'll spend the majority of our time tonight. We're doing great on time, and I wanted to be sure that we had plenty of time to address this issue, so we should be good. This is gonna take a lot to set up. I'm gonna go through a couple slides, and then I'm gonna switch over to a 3D model of the 100 block where we can fly around and look at some different scenarios, and it should be pretty fun to see and explore. So this map here is existing height, and so everything in yellow is a 1-story structure. Everything in blue is 1.5 to 2 stories, or 17 to 27 feet generally. And then everything in red is more of those taller 2 or 3-story structures, greater than 28 feet to the midpoint of the roof. Everything with the black dashed lines going through it is a pitched roof. So that's important to understand, that the large majority of structures in the 100 block are pitched roof structures. And what I mean by half stories, this can be confusing, but basically this is showing a 1.5 story and this is a 2.5 story. What that means is the half story is tucked into the roof structure. So it doesn't have a full footprint of the bottom floor, but you can fit some program into that roof, so that we call those half stories. So this is a 1.5 story. This would be an example of a 2.5 story that you might have some program up there. Let's see, next slide. So this is what the allowed height is under existing code. Everything in blue, so every property that touches Main Street has a 28-foot height limit. That is 28 feet to the maximum point for a flat roof. But for a pitched roof, that is height is measured to the midpoint of that roof, from the point to the very top. So this is what we mean by that half structure, that you actually could potentially, 28 feet is a little low for a 2.5 story building, but it's not impossible. But if you're doing a flat roof, you only get the maximum of 28. The thing that I think this way of measuring the height does is it incentivizes pitched roofs, because you can go a little bit taller. Whether that is desired to continue or not, I'm not sure. We'll work through that. But just wanted you to understand how that height is measured. On the red, so everything kind of west of Williams and along Nelson is allowed to go up to 35 feet under existing regulations. That's typically, more of a 3-story structure. Perhaps a 3.5 story, you might get some program up there. If it's a residential only use, so if you do go through the conditional use permit, so there is a lot of residential there, it has to follow residential standards. And so and then it falls back down to 28 feet. So it can be confusing, but under existing rules by right, you can't do residential. So we wanted to show, this really is the by right scenario. If you're going to build a building in that red zone, you can go to 35 feet. Okay, so we're going to transition into a SketchUp model, and just somebody nod your head or verbally tell me, can you now see my other screen?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so we are going to fly through the 100 block and look at a few different scenarios. I'm going to set this up and go through this in order. We're gonna look at some conditions along Main Street. We're going to look at some conditions along Williams Street and some along Eagle River. I wanted to start here kind of in plan view. You can see the area of downtown. You can see building footprints, where parking is, the road, Main Street coming through. Here's the river, just to orient you, and north is up. So when we talk about heights, and especially in these, quaint mountain communities, sun access is important. So I just want to show everyone, I'll turn on shadows here. We're looking at equinox. So this is an average sun condition. Of course, in the winter, it'll be a little bit shadier because the sun is lower. In the summer, it will be a better case scenario, less shade from buildings because the sun is higher. So we're looking at an average condition. At 9 a.m., you can start to see these buildings on the east side of Main Street. They get to about half of the street, those taller structures up here. This still allows for plenty of sunshine to hit the facades on the west side and the sidewalks. So this might be, this is in the morning. So this might be where your naturally, drawn uses are more morning uses. So brunch or coffee shops. At 12:30, sun is high in the sky. You're getting some, pretty average, nothing shading too much of the sidewalk or too much of the street. Here, Hotel Minturn is probably the tallest. You can kind of see how that hits the parking lot there. And then looking at 4 o'clock, so just before the sun goes down over the mountains. Again, you get that other condition. Now the west side of the street is shading about half of the street, but you get your sunny afternoon side on the east side of the street. So really, I just want to point out and let you see kind of existing conditions, how buildings are being shaded today, and how sun access affects the general 100 block. The summary is that you have good sun access, and the orientation of your main street as a north-south is really an ideal condition. So not that you can change it. Okay, so we're just gonna fly around, as I said here. I want to start by kind of looking at this aerial view. You can see these, I've picked 3 sites in beige that are going to be our test sites for today. And we're going to look at some different scenarios for, if those properties did redevelop under existing regulations, this is what could be built. And then we'll look at some options. Just full disclosure, these are for testing purposes only. I haven't consulted the property owners. I'm not working for them. I'm not a developer. These are simply to test different scenarios of a couple different Main Street fronting properties. One that would go to Williams Street here, so Minturn Country Club. One that would go from Main Street to Eagle River. And then one along Williams, because they have different rules. So first, we're going to go over here to Minturn Country Club and kind of look kind of pedestrian level. So this is standing on the street. This is what the massing looks like today. So it's a 1-story structure, about maybe 16 to 18 feet tall. So, and you'll notice that, and we'll work through this, that these properties on the northern side of Main Street are a little different in that they come all the way up to the sidewalk. So you can see those buildings, and I'm sure are aware there's a pretty tight sidewalk space to walk there. But they do feel a little different than the further you get down to the south. So let me look here. This is the current sort of regulations. This is the imaginary box that if you were to redevelop, this is what you could build to today. So this is showing that 28-foot height limit. So this is the maximum 28 feet. If you are a flat roof structure, you can just put that box there. If it's a pitched roof, there is a bulk plane that sets in. And then again, for that, there is that rule that the 28-foot height is measured to the midpoint of the roof. So you could actually go a little bit taller if you are a pitched roof structure. But generally, this is kind of that imaginary box that those regulations set. So you can kind of feel what that feels like. I'm just going to walk through a couple other, scenarios. So 28 feet is, a decent 2-story structure in a condition like this, in a more urban condition of a downtown. Another way to do that is to use the bulk plane, but do it on all sides. So this is just showing you a different scenario of that imaginary box. So you might set a max dimension and then have the bulk plane go up from there. This raises that dimension of that, instead of 20 feet, which is more of a 1-story before the bulk plane sets in, this would be allowing more of a 2-story frontage, which is what these feel like. And bulk planes can be a little interesting to administer. They have, they're used a lot in zoning codes, so they certainly are not new. They're meant to kind of step back the massing and allow sun access in. But just showing some other ways that can be done is kind of just looking at massing and setting some different dimensions for this scenario is just looking at, maybe there's a scenario where on Main Street you allow a certain dimension to be closer to the street, whereas a certain dimension has to be further back to allow for those patio spaces. Maybe, we'll talk through this. Should buildings, new construction, be able to go up to 3 stories or not on Main Street? We'll walk through those scenarios, but if so, maybe it should be set back up there, and you can see from different views. Turn off the shadows here for a second. If I move the camera up a little bit, we want to make sure that, even if you do step that back, it still feels like a 2-story structure on Main Street. So I know I just wanted to present some of these imaginary boxes. This is essentially how the dimensions that will go into a code. But I know that can be hard to imagine in your mind. So I'm going to offer some architecture. This is just simply, I ask you to keep an open mind. I did not design these buildings. They might not be your tip, you might not like the style, but really just pay attention to the scale that they provide. So back to existing conditions. This is the existing bulk plane and allowance today. And so what that might translate to, we can look at this condition where, it's a typical 2-story Main Street traditional storefront building. So that could be built under today's regulations. Another option is a 2.5 story. So how does this feel compared to that 2-story building? Is this something that might be appropriate in downtown, having the more that 1/2 story tucked into the roof? So with the existing bulk plane, I can turn that on top of this. This could almost be built. So you can see that bulk plane would make that top gable go back further. But again, these are the things that we want to test and then reverse engineer what's appropriate. So I do want to present something like this to see how people react to it. There might be another option where so this is that 2.5 story. Another option would be a 2-story in front where perhaps, it could go back to 3 stories along Williams. And so again, these are, just some massing models that show architecture. Don't get too attached to the style. Not particularly in love with this one either, but could there be a scenario where there's 2 stories required in front, but it allows for the 3 stories in the rear, kind of the back half of the site? Going back to this view where we want to compare. Another scenario might be more of that varied massing. So still, again, regulating that 2-story feeling along Main Street, but allowing a 3rd floor more in a penthouse style that would be required to be stepped back. So that, again, from the street, let me place my person. From the street, if you're looking around, it feels like a 1- and 2-story building. You would have to look up to see that 3rd story. So these are some options we're going to look at. We are going to go back and vote on them, but I just want to fly around and show everyone these different scenarios just to give you an idea of scale and massing, so that we can, again, reverse engineer into some of the better regulations for the town. So this is sort of that gateway area at the corner as you enter Main Street there. Let's go now to look from the other side of Main Street. So this is.
Shani, can you pause to take a live question? I didn't know the answer to it.
Yeah.
There was a question about when you did the shadowing model, the shadowing in the model, were you able to take into account the topography of the hillsides where often the sun goes down behind those hills fairly
Yes.
early in the afternoon, and I didn't know the answer to that.
Yeah, so you can see, we do have the hillside modeled.
Okay,
So the topography is there, and so it does cast shadows appropriately, based on.
great, thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna go to Main Street looking north. So this is existing conditions. This is that little shotgun house there today. So you can kind of see how these buildings feel today. And instead of going through the bulk planes, because we've already kind of explained how that can all be regulated, and we might look at bulk planes, we might look at step backs, we might we'll play around with the appropriate dimensions, but we really want to get gut reaction to like what's appropriate on the street. So this is sort of a different condition. More of the residential structures here. So these buildings are set back from Main Street a little bit. And so let's just look at that 2-story condition. So this is sort of modeling what that same 2-story storefront might look like in the existing conditions today. Flat roof, just showing maybe a 2-story with a pitched roof. Here's that 2.5-story. And then finally that 2-story in front with a 3rd floor step back. And then the one that I actually forgot to look at is we also want to present a full 3-story option, just in the event that that is popular. This is what that scale would look like here. And since I missed doing that on the other one, let me go back there and show you what full 3 stories would look like in existing condition context. So those are the scenarios for Main Street, what we're calling Main Street South. So I'll go through those one more time. Really allowing a maximum of 28 feet in that 2-story envelope period. Maybe allowing for that extra height if it's a pitched roof, like the existing regulation says. Is there, perhaps a desire to, allow that 1/2-story up there, or looking at the more 2- and 3-story massing and what that feels like. So again, we'll go back and look. I'll have pictures of these that you can remember and recall, and we can always go back to the model if we need to. So that's Main Street. We wanted to look at that sort of northern segment condition as well as the southern segment condition, because they do feel a little bit different today. And so we want to, think about those different contexts in terms of when we get into writing the regulation, should they be the same all along Main Street, or should they maybe differ? And so that's what the voting will tell us. While we're on this property, I'm going to go back to existing conditions and look at this property along Eagle River. So this is Riverside here in the green space, the one-way drive headed south, and you can kind of see the existing, these are all the more residential shed structures that line that area today. Under existing regulations, this is that 28-foot box. And so turning that into architecture, this is sort of what could be built under existing regulations. Again, kind of that more 2-story structure there. We're going to present a couple options here. Again, just for mass and scale, looking at a 2.5-story structure and what that feels like along the street with these other structures. Or perhaps I also wanted to present just another option here, knowing that the context is more of a 1-story atmosphere. So another option would be to look at some sort of regulation that says buildings can step up to 2 stories here, or 3 stories, but you really want to try to keep that 1-story frontage along Eagle River. If that's desired, that is something that could be written into the code. So again, I'll go through those. This is massing that would be allowed. This would be almost allowed. It's a little too tall to fit in the box that you have today, or that 1 to 2 story step back. The other thing that this could do, which is cool, is you know, provide maybe some roof decks overlooking the river. Okay, moving along to our last condition here is Williams Street. So this is looking south along Williams. So you're coming in, it's a one-way going south. This is Hotel Minturn back here. This is a 2-story apartment structure. And we have some tents shown here for the Minturn market. So here, let's look at just showing, you know, existing bulk. Again, that 28-foot plane. If it's you can go up to that 35-foot dimension though. So it goes up a little bit higher, but the bulk plane still starts at 20. So it's a bit of a higher pitch. So again, let's just look at these conditions. So here is a 2-story condition and what that would feel like on Williams Street. Here's that 2.5-story condition along Williams. Skip that one. And then here is the 2 to 3-story massing and what that would feel like. So, and I think we did, yeah, full 3 stories. So 2-story enclosure, 2.5-story enclosure, and then that 2 to 3-story enclosure. So again, we can flip through these, but these are the conditions that we want to get your votes on tonight. That's really important to look at these 3 conditions along Main Street, both north and south, along Williams, because in the 2020 charrette, it was expressed that you know, people would really like to see more activity on Williams and have it be sort of this cool, you know, pedestrian shared street with more active uses. And it's starting to get that with some of the uses happening back here today. And then Eagle River, we wanted to look at just to explain what's allowed today and sort of give some options there as well. So this exercise will really help us get into understand what's desired in terms of building height, overall building height and scale. And then we can, again, there will be other opportunities when we get into drafting them to review and comment. So I'm going to switch back to the PowerPoint now, and we have a couple polls to go through. So I will share my screen, and you all can see the purple now that says
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So our first poll is looking at Main Street North. So this is the area, the first area that we went to. So this is at the Minturn Country Club example. So we want to ask you to vote on these scenarios, and it would be so number 1 would say, you know, 2-story max, 2-story and 28 feet max. Draw a box and don't incentivize pitched roofs. Just put everything within that 28-foot box. It offers predictability, and but it would be 2-story maximum. Option 2 would be a slight modification of that. It would be sort of what you have today, but maybe playing with the dimensions to make more sense architecturally. So 2-story and 28 feet would be max for flat roofs. But then pitched roofs might be able to go up to that 2.5-story kind of typology that we showed. This would incentivize pitched roofs by allowing that extra height. Option 3 would be 2-story max along Main Street. But you could go back in the back half of the site, you could go up to 3 stories along Williams. So you would step back from Main Street, that 3rd floor. quite a distance, at least 20 to 25 feet. Option 4 is looking at allowing up to 3 stories, but requiring that 3rd story to be stepped back on all sides. So instead of just stepping back on Main Street, this would, even on the sides and along Williams, you would step back that third floor. Option 5 is just allow 3 stories by right, and we'll, figure out the dimensions and set that maximum height. Or 6, we are presenting another idea if people want to choose 6 and then raise your hand and tell us your idea. So I think voting is open and you can choose what you think is appropriate in this area of Main Street.
Voting is open. We do have about 70% people have participated so far. If you do want to choose 6 other idea, raise hand. Please do actually choose it and submit and then raise your hand. That way we'll know about how many people to call on. Right now we only have waiting on about 5 more people. Give y'all about 10 more seconds. Okay, I'll close the poll. So it looks like the top answer was number 2, 2-story and 28 feet max for flat roofs, pitch roofs incentivized. With the next, that was 43% of people, with the next coming in at up to 3 stories, require a 3rd story to step back at 18%. And then up to 3 stories allowed and 2-story, 28 feet maximum tied at 15%, with number 3 being the lowest at 5%. And I do have 2 people who raised their hand, who clicked raised hand, and I have 4 people in the audience who have raised hands. So
I can see the poll results now. So
awesome.
Yay. For that. Okay, so do you want to go ahead and just select someone that raised their hand and let them?
Oh, wait, before you do that, Lynn asked a question about reviewing the poll results for the first question about priority uses, which I think would be interesting in light of the heights, because now we're thinking about what the priority uses would be for these types of buildings. So Madison, do you have a way to just show?
Yeah, so
Oh.
I have a picture of it. If you can't bring it up, I can. It was
okay. I can share one result or the other. I can't share them both at the same time.
Can you just go back to poll number 1?
Yes.
Or maybe it was this one.
Yes.
Yeah, it was this one.
We
Okay,
switched
Lynn
those.
and others. So it looked like the tops were landscaping, public gathering space, improved circulation.
And shopping and dining.
or
Shopping and dining.
did Lynn mean poll 4 where we were asking about the use scenarios?
She was asking about the priorities for 100 block.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So that would be shopping and dining and improved circulation and landscaping.
Yeah. And before we get to the answering hands, thank you so much, everybody, for your great questions. You're keeping me really busy trying to answer them all. I'm doing my best to answer them, but let's take some hands.
Okay. Ken, you have the ability to unmute yourself. Ken. Should be a button in the bottom, either left hand or upper left hand corner, depending on what device you're on. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. I think it's premature to be asking all these height questions, what you want, without simultaneously discussing the issues of parking traffic flow, because more height means more cars. We can't keep adding and taking away parking. So it doesn't make sense to me to ask it independently of discussing the other issues. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. And just, yeah, we will get to talking about parking and how that does impact. But I appreciate your comment. Anybody else have their hand raised?
Yes, I have one other person because it looks like Ken had his hand raised twice. Jim, you have the ability to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I just had actually, I was wondering what the reasoning was for having only, or not allowing or not presenting 3 stories on Eagle River. Because if that's going to be more residential, it would seem to me, that's the ideal spot for residential. Why not put 3 stories, why not allow 3 stories there?
Okay, good comment. We do have a section where we'll vote on the Eagle River scenarios. So just make sure to, when we get there, to pick 6 and then add that comment. Okay, is there any other hands raised or ideas that someone wants to present for this area of Main Street?
I have one more hand raised, or 2 more now. Okay. Nancy, you should have the ability to unmute yourself.
It's really Tom. I own the Minturn Club, but we're on Nancy's computer. One option that I didn't see there was, like, for the Minturn Country Club, is to keep it as it is.
So one story maximum.
We still want to stay in business in Minturn. However, not once has anybody ever spoken to the question I always ask. You guys always talk about small boutique retail, blah, blah, blah. No one ever says the Minturn Country Club, we want to keep it there and all that. Well, we want to stay there. And I hear all the time about they want to keep downtown quaint and everything. Well, I'm recommending to the people that own our building that they just basically remodel the inside of the building, do some things to the outside of the building before it falls down, and let us continue in business. Unless somebody's got an idea of where you are going to put the Minturn Country Club, which I've asked many times, and everybody mentions, oh, we need parking, we need park. No, we don't need parking. We need more people coming to Minturn. Anyway, my question is, there should be another option, and that is keeping some of those buildings as is.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I just want to say, if that wasn't clear, that would always be an option, is there's, nothing saying we just happened to pick that site. And, I wanted to be context sensitive. So I wanted to show some site in the 100 block just so you could see the comparison, but really, preserving existing structures is not out of the question, and
Okay.
never should be.
Okay, I have Amanda. You should have the ability to unmute yourself.
Hey, thanks, Madison. So my question is there a way to build into the bulk regulation that the bulk has to be different than the buildings next to you? I think one of the uniqueness of Minturn is the fact that we do have all of these different heights and bulk today, and how do we preserve that with our regulations going forward? So I think that's my question is, or is the max, and it would then be up to the developer?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I think typically that would be something more in the guidelines. So we will we will be writing standards, which are, you have to, those are the dimensional standards, like maximum 28 feet and setback of whatever. But we will certainly be writing guidelines, which would encourage property owners or, any new development to fit into the character. And that can be something that is, and we read that from the 2020 Charrette too, that people love the diversity of architecture and styles and sizes of buildings. So that is sort of a common theme. Is it impossible to write into a code? No, just not very common, and it might be a little hard to administer. But good point. And I'm taking notes.
Okay, the next person is Lynn Feiger. Lynn, you should have the ability to unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm concerned a little bit about the implication of the discussion so far with respect to existing buildings. And I want to clarify that nothing is going to be considered which would require any existing buildings in the 100 block to change. We're just talking about major remodeling or construction of new buildings. So I think that should address the concern of the gentleman who operates the Denver Country Club. I mean, the Minturn Country Club.
Thank you. Thank you for that point. Okay.
I
If there-
have two more people.
Oh, okay. Let's take
Before actually we go into that, Cheney, can you just speak to kind of why these these code updates remain important, even as the kind of the historic district is on the table?
Yeah, so I think it's exactly what Lynn just said. Even if a historic district is approved and there are, regulations and guidelines for historic structures, that, there always is a chance for infill development to happen, even in a historic district. And so, looking at, or modifications, let's say you keep one of those 1-story buildings there, but you want to add on to it, like add a roof deck for a restaurant, or put some program on a second floor. Those types of things happen in historic districts as well, so additions. And so those triggers that Lynn mentioned, like modifications, major modifications to a building or infill development, is what we're talking about here. So does that help, Ellie?
Thanks.
Okay, let's take the 2 raised hands, and then we'll move on to the other contexts to get some feedback.
Okay, Charles.
Hi, it's Charles from Algem. I just wonder if there isn't a third option that encourages, I put this in the comments, but encourages mass and height to be pulled off Main Street and towards the hillsides. I think what's troubling is that this architecture is, could be Rifle, it could be South Glen Mall, it could be, any flat place, and Minturn is not flat. And I wonder if we couldn't look more towards hill villages in other contexts around the world and allow mass to come off Main Street and be, particularly residential mass, be put up against the hillside, mirroring the natural contours, and try and encourage that rather than, do we want to look like downtown Rifle, or do we want to look like downtown Frisco, or do we want to look like downtown Breckenridge kind of thing? Minturn's special in that it's very tight and encourage these east-west corridors as well, and bring people off of Main Street into the village.
Good point.
Okay. Morgan, you have the ability to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I keep adding to the dialogue about the historic district. But I do think there is another scenario, and you were just mentioning infill development, is that if the historic district moves forward, how are new developments staying in synergy? And so it seems like we're not having a discussion about preservation of historic buildings coinciding with new development, and that's concerning.
Yeah, so that's what the guidelines will be for. And the historic district, if and when it is adopted, will also go through their own process. So we are being careful working with staff. I mean, that is the essence of this exercise, right? We know that the 100 block and Minturn has a cherished character. It's not identified as historic with a capital H yet. It might be, and it might have special rules, but we know that it's important for any development to fit into that historic character. So I want to remind everyone that is top of mind. That is something important that came out of the 2020 charrette. That is something we've confirmed with these polls, is that, you know, that character is important to maintain, and so it should be reflected in any new architecture as well. So thank you for reinforcing that. Okay, let's move on. I'm going to change to the options for Main Street South, and so we just want to understand your vote might be the exact same. You might think that Main Street is Main Street and just make the rules the same. But in the event that you feel a little bit differently about South, just because the existing patterns are a little different, we want to know that. So the options presented here on the screen are similar to the first one. Option 1 being just make that 28-foot box. Everything has to fit into it. Option 2 being, 2-story and 28 max for a flat roof, but allow a little bit taller for pitched roofs to incentivize pitched roofs. Number 3 being allow up to 3 stories, but step back that third story on all sides. Or number 4, just allow up to 3 stories, or 5. Other idea, raise your hand. So the gentleman that mentioned the 3 stories along Eagle River, that would be option 5.
We're at about 70% participated right now. Give y'all about 15 more seconds.
Janie, are we done with the audio discussion for the time being?
Yes, unless anyone raises their hand for this poll.
Okay.
We have this poll and then 2 more, Williams and Eagle River, to get through, and then we're going to take a break. And we were hoping to get to the break by 7. So we have about 12 minutes to stay on time.
Okay.
And Janie, can you just define the boundaries of Main Street South as you're thinking about it?
Yeah, generally we're thinking north of Nelson. So where, where's my cursor? On these, right where the 2 residential structures are north of Nelson, it would be kind of that line. So everything south of that, including more of the residential character and the residential uses.
Okay, so we did have 3 people click 5, though I only see 1 person with their hand raised. So if the other 2 who clicked other idea would raise their hand, that would be helpful. But it looks like 2-story, 28 feet max for flat roofs, pitched roofs incentivized. Came out on top again at 41%. with the second option being up to 3 stories allowed, that was 24%. And then the third option, or the third runner-up, was the 2-story 28 feet maximum at 17%. So, Jim here. Okay, Jim, you have the ability to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I suggested the 3 stories because if you have retail on the first floor, you don't have much space for living above, especially if there's only 1 story. So I think the view along the river is probably the most beautiful, and that's an ideal spot for residential living. Also, as far as parking goes, I mean, there probably should be some requirement for either underground parking or, a parking structure could be built in a certain area or whatever. But I just think if we're going to be serious about how Minturn is growing and what a desirable place it is now and will continue to be, I think we ought to think about, optimizing living spaces in and around Minturn. And I think adding the 3rd story on the riverside would do that in the best way.
Thank you for your comment, and thank you for remembering that we are thinking long-term. And so it's important to have that long-term vision.
Okay, Ron, you have the ability to unmute yourself.
Yeah, the way you guys have done this, option 4 and number 5 are kind of the same thing. That's what the 3 stories, I voted for 4. And then after that, you said 5, the 3 stories on the river. So you're kind of combining number 4 and number 5 into the same thing.
Yeah, I was just telling Jim that would be his. Oh, no. Yeah, you're right. We did do that. Sorry about that. Thanks for pointing it out.
No, just so that should be known that there is a desire for that. That's,
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, David, you have the ability to unmute yourself.
Thank you. And I agree with Charles that a lot of these designs don't incorporate the hillsides nor how the sun comes up and down in the, during the day. And thank you for your time.
Okay, and I have one more raised hand. Larry?
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Thank you very much. My concern has to do with 2 defining points. One being a 28-foot measurement or 35, utilizing feet and then utilizing stories. As I've recognized, many of the beautiful historic buildings throughout Colorado, you have very tall ceilings within a commercial space. So if you were to incorporate a nice tall ceiling commercial space for my business, the Scarab, I would require that for sure because I need to hang very large textiles on the wall. It would put a limitation on how tall my 2nd floor could be if I wanted to, say, live above it. And that's why I'm a proponent of 3 stories because I believe we have a lot of talented architects who can make it look more than just a box. And I understand the fear of the box, but I am a big proponent of allowing for a higher building height. I don't know that 3 stories is the right terminology where we're using footage as the caveat of what that limitation is. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I just want to point out that we will, analyze and get to, realistic dimensions. That is something that had been brought up before as well. And you're right, those commercial structures that tend to fit on the ground floor of a mixed use building are needing, 16 to 18, 14 to 18 feet, generally, sometimes taller. So that's an important consideration. Some codes have both. Some will regulate by stories and feet. For example, I work in Denver and they do that. Others just do feet. And, you know, we could look at just stories too, but then the height could be unknown.
Okay, I have a couple more hands raised now. Ross, you have the ability to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. Ross here. I've been living in Minturn off and on for the better part of 35 years now. You know, my concern really boils down to the fact that I've got kids now and the town just seems to lack some basic amenities that I think are necessary for me and my family. And if we are to develop buildings that are going to accommodate these amenities, which I think are absolutely necessary at daycare, for example, we need to have folks in town that are going to be able to work these types of amenities. And right now, we just don't have the housing in place to be able to accommodate these types of things for the future of Minturn. And so I think somebody had pointed out earlier where the point about, okay, if you're going to have retail on floor one, you're really limited with a two-story building because you don't have the housing necessary to support that retail on floor two, right? You kind of need to go beyond that. And for me, somebody who has a young growing family and is committed to staying in Minturn, these are the things that I'm thinking about as we think about the next generation of Minturn and the sort of amenities that we need to continue to live in this town and continue to help this town prosper. These are the things that are going through my mind as I think about these new zonings and regulations that we're putting in place.
Excellent point.
Okay, last person, Kelly.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Kelly Toon here. I agree with some of the others that the higher we go, I'm really concerned about the parking. And maybe the developer should have to build a parking structure somewhere underground is just filled with water because we have a very saturated lower table of water, and then you have to have ramps getting in. So I don't see that as an option. One of my most successful downtown areas that I've visited and grew up with is Balboa Island, and almost all, I'd say 80% of the shops on Main Street are about one story. I'd say maybe 20% are 2 stories, and at 2 stories are at a max of 20 feet. And it is one of the most thriving tourist destinations, just packed with people. Parking can take 45 minutes to find a parking space and people still come. I just get really worried at the sketches of 3-story buildings with shadow lines and ice buildup. I just really think we can keep a lower profile on Main Street and still be super successful with businesses if we have businesses that are actually open. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
Looking at the time, we need to probably move on. Let's go to the next condition, which we're asking you about the Eagle River side. So 1 again would be that 2-story max. Maybe we'll work with that dimension, but not incentivizing pitched roofs. Number 2 would be that incentivize pitched roofs by allowing pitched roofs to be a little bit taller than flat roofs. Number 3 would be the 1-story facing the river. And then number 4 would be, this is where I meant for Jim, that 4 would be your idea of going up to 3 stories, or any other ideas that you have that aren't listed. So.
Okay, we're at about 55% now. 80. 10 more seconds. Okay. So it looks like a 2-story with 28 feet for flat roofs and pitch roofs incentivized went out yet again at 49%. With the second coming in at 1 story facing the river with an upper story setback at 22%. And the third being the 2-story and 28 feet maximum at 17%, though it does look like we have 5 people who chose to raise their hands. So, Ken?
Okay, great. So we've heard, let's ask, I'll ask you to unmute someone that we haven't heard from. So we've talked about the 3 stories there. We've talked about the parking concerns. Anyone have any other ideas for Eagles River that you want? I just want to make sure that everyone can be heard.
So right now, the people with their hands raised, we have heard from before. If anybody else has anything, please feel free to raise your hand. Okay.
Okay, let me ask this another way. I don't want to, I mean, if you, please, if your comment has already been touched on, if you could unraise your hand so that we can stay on time. If you have a brand new comment that hasn't been brought up, you can keep your hand raised and we will unmute you real quick.
Also, you can always use the Q&A. So if you have a follow-up comment or a question to clarify, please pop it in there.
Krista, you have the ability to unmute yourself.
So one of the things we love best about Minturn is that the river goes through it. We're definitely river people. I think that if you go too high back there, then you're kind of limiting that view or even what you can see of the river to people who can afford expensive redevelopment on that side of town.
Okay. Ken?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Regarding the riverfront, I think it's an untapped resource. I always thought that we could have food truck Fridays there all summer. We have to get people over there. I'm not commenting on the height that should be over there, but we need to utilize that space. Al fresco dining in the evenings all summer long, food trucks. I think we can really revitalize the town using the riverfront, like many other towns have done. Thank you.
Okay, Kelly?
Following up on Ken's thing, I proposed 2 or 3 years ago to Cindy, I believe, and maybe Michelle about on the same track, moving the Minturn market over to the river. And I think if we're gonna redevelop the core 100 block where the Minturn market is now and go up with 3 stories, it's gonna be not quite a beautiful experience being in shadows constantly. So I would love to see the Minturn market move towards the river with tents along the river, and people could utilize their driveways for tents, and it's just would make for a quieter, more enjoyable experience for everybody. I feel that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Jim?
Yeah, one point I meant to make earlier that I forgot about is that, Minturn is becoming pretty much landlocked because, the river on one side and the mountains on the other. So I think we're going to have to think seriously about going up rather than, because there's nowhere to go out. And that's why I think, 3 stories is pretty reasonable.
Okay.
Okay, do we have any?
It looks like raised hands left over from before.
Okay, great. Let's do one more poll and then we'll take a break. So we're moving on to William Street now. This is something that in the 2020 charrette, people said they wanted, you know, the feeling of Williams could be more active, have more active uses and such. So the options presented here are the 2-story option that we've went through multiple times. The second option is always the same, that has been the most popular for incentivizing pitched roofs. 3 is the 3-story option with the third story step back. And then 4 is any other ideas.
Okay, we're at 56%.
Scott, do you want to answer the food truck question while people are answering the poll?
Sure. Good evening. Good evening, everybody. The town just adopted food truck regulations this last year. So the question was, are there any restrictions in place that limits that? And there are. So good question. Thank you.
Okay. Have about 82% participation. I'll give everybody about 10 more seconds. Okay. So it looks like number 3 actually won out this time. At 47%, up to 3 stories, required 3-story to step back, with the second place 2-story, 28 feet for flat roofs, pitch roofs incentivized, and the third being 2-story and 28 feet maximum hard box line. It does look like we have a couple of hand raised. So Ken? Ken, you have the ability to unmute yourself. Ken? Okay. Morgan, you want to go?
The only thing I would comment on for those properties that are on William Street, right up against the hill, is there any potential option of having 4 stories, or does that become a shadow issue?
Yeah, good comment. And because of the hillside, there shouldn't be a shadow issue because the hillside is already the monster of shade in that scenario. So good point, and thank you for that.
Ken? Okay, maybe he didn't have anything to say.
Okay, awesome. Well, this is good and great participation. We're going to take these polls and analyze all of this. As I said, we will take notes, and all of this will go into draft recommendations. We're going to pause and give everyone a quick, let's do about an 8-minute break. We're a little bit behind time. So if everyone can come back at about 7:16, and we'll get started on the second half of the presentation. So feel free to go. We have started recording again. Thank you, Madison. Okay, so the next 45 minutes, we're going to go through site design aspects of regulations. So talking about setbacks and lot coverage, more fun stuff. And then parking, the really fun stuff last. So stay with us hopefully for another 45 minutes, and then we'll get you out of here on time. For site design, I'm going to hand it off to my colleague Ellie, who's going to walk us through some of the site design stuff. So Ellie.
Great, thanks, Janie. Do you want to start sharing your screen? Or do you want me to share?
Nope, I thought I did. Thank you. Okay. Can you see the screen now?
Yes.
Okay.
Weird, it's not showing. Oh, there we go. Oh, apparently my internet connection's unstable. That's great. Okay, so we just want to run through some of these 2020 Charrette outcomes related to site design and public realm, and just as we did before, wanting to talk about the extent to which you still agree with them or have some different thoughts. So some of the main outcomes were enhancing the sense of arrival at the north end of town and clearly directing people to local amenities and parking, prioritizing pedestrian improvements in and around the 100 block, including the bridge, providing a location for passenger drop off and pickup and identifying multimodal improvements, using public art to enhance vibrancy of the 100 block, improving Toledo Street as a critical connector to the river and enhancing existing amenities along the river, maintaining a dedicated space for Minturn Market. Next slide. And these were some of the other outcomes we heard. This has been talked about already a little bit tonight, having more connections to the river, having buildings that go in and out along Main Street, so not having kind of one set setback, but having some variation in the facades there. And then creating more opportunities for landscaping, courtyards, and cafes seating. So figuring out where some of those green spaces can come in. And so now there'll be a poll that asks you for your level of agreement with what you just heard. And if there's something that you didn't, so I think it'll be again, high as, if you fully agree, it'll be 1, and then don't agree is 5. And if there's some things you want to provide comments on related to that, please either raise your hand or I guess we can start with putting them into the Q&A and see where we go based on the poll results.
We're at about 65% participation. %. I'll keep it open for about 10 more seconds. Okay. It looks like the majority of people do strongly agree or agree, with 35% and 30% respectively. There was 19% of people who strongly disagreed, and then the remainder were neutral or disagreed.
Great. So maybe in the interest of time, if you strongly disagreed and it can be easily captured in something you can write into the Q&A, please do that. If there's something you feel like you need to say, you can raise your hand.
Okay, I have one raised hand. Larry, you have the ability to unmute yourself.
Thank you for your time. One of the things that I've recognized since we did that charrette, as I live, I don't live, but I spend a lot of time downtown in the 100 block, is the amount of people that come into town to pick up food to go, which is really amazing. And one of the things that I see is that there's oftentimes no place to park, so that they can quickly run in and grab their food and run out. I also see a large number of people pulling a U-turn within the 100 block. They're coming in and just flipping a U-turn oftentimes pulling into my driveway, which is not a problem, but I get concerned about some of the pedestrian risks that are there. And it was not discussed when we did the charrette back originally, and I felt it was important to bring that up today. Thank you.
Thanks for adding that. Okay, next slide. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at existing site design and how buildings are laid out relative to what's actually allowed. And then we can figure out kind of how do we work with that. So in terms of lot size, the minimum in the 100 block is 2,500 square feet. The maximum is 7,500 square feet. So what does that mean? That means that if you have a lot that is smaller than 2,500 square feet to redevelop it, you would need to add, put multiple lots together. And if it's more than 7,500 square feet, you would need to divide it. And so these areas that Cheney is marking in that black line are those lots in the green or dark blue. And this analysis isn't perfect. This is based on GIS data, but it gives us a relative sense. So I don't think we have, do we have a poll on this one?
No, we do
No,
not.
we don't. Okay. So we'll just move on to the next one, but if you have any comments about that, please put them into the Q&A. So required setbacks. So for any lot in the 100 block, you're required to have 10 foot from the front. So that's from the parcel line, 5 foot on either side, and then 30 feet from live streams. So as you can see, there's a lot of buildings that are kind of coming against that. That dark gray area is really the allowable building footprint based on those setbacks. And so some of those areas outlined in red are where buildings are not in keeping with that. So kind of prime examples of that are the buildings that go right up to the sidewalk, or the buildings that are put together and we see, or next to each other. And we see a lot of those kind of in that northern portion of the 100 block. And so I think the poll question we have here is, Cheney has drawn this black line of kind of where we see a lot of that existing, and how should we kind of differentiate or not differentiate in terms of what's allowed. So potentially making changes to allow buildings maybe to come up to the sidewalk, or to be to not have any space between them.
Yeah, and so the question is, should setbacks north of Nelson in that black outlined area be allowed to be smaller given the existing context of buildings that are closer together? So you can answer yes, properties north of Nelson should be allowed to be closer together, or no, all properties should be treated equally.
We're at about 75%. I'll give everybody about 15 more seconds. Okay. It looks like 2/3 of people chose A, yes, properties north of Nelson should allow buildings to be closer together to match existing conditions, while 1/3 of people chose no, that all properties should be treated equally.
Great. So the next element we're going to talk about is lot coverage. So right now, what's allowed in the 100 block is up to 80% lot coverage. There's only 2 parcels where that is occurring, these 2 that are in the dark. And there's actually a fair bit of variability, as you can see by all the different shades of pink we have here. But similar to the last question, we want to ask, for this area north of Nelson, does it make sense to allow maybe a higher lot coverage there and a lower lot coverage maybe elsewhere. And we're not necessarily sticking to this 80% that exists now, but just kind of thinking about the areas and whether they should be different or the same from each other.
Okay, we're at about 75%. Close it in about 15 seconds. Okay. This one was a little bit closer. 56% of people said that north of Nelson should be allowed to have more, while 44% of people said that all properties should be treated equally. And Ellie, I do have a raised hand if you are taking those at this time.
Sure.
Larry?
Yes, my question is, why are we limiting this poll to being north of Nelson if we're covering the 100 block and we're looking for consistency? Shouldn't we be inclusive of the remainder of the 100 block? Thank you.
Tanny, do you want to speak to that or do you want me to?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So when we present these options, we always compare them to what's on the ground. And so our analysis, as you can see from these maps, shows that the existing conditions are a little different north of Nelson. And so, I mean, all of these properties were built before the zoning code existed. Well, not all of them. So a few of them have been built under the existing zoning code, but the majority of the historic lots were built before that. And so we just want to analyze historic patterns and see if it's desired for future development to match them or not.
I think also, you know, there is a fair bit of variability in the 100 block in terms of, we're seeing it in terms of site coverage, we're seeing it in terms of existing uses. You know, a lot of those lots along Nelson are residential. And so we do kind of want to understand, you know, what do these differences mean and how do we treat this area?
Okay. So we are at 7:30. We're making up a little bit of time. We're going to move on to the parking discussion. And so this will be the last setup and walkthrough in terms of a topic that we'll talk about. This has been brought up a few times tonight, and you're right that we can't be remiss and talk about development without talking about parking. And so and it's important to note as part of the community plan update that we are conducting a parking study. And so that's ongoing or soon wrapping up, and we will have the results of that to be able to inform future parking regulations. But in terms of looking at the code and any parking regulations for the 100 block, the 100 block is treated like everywhere else in town. So, most codes and parking requirements are written for new development. And so typically on, thinking about larger sites and not necessarily infill development on historic sites. We know that, absolutely there is a parking demand for the 100 block because that's the majority of businesses, but those are temporary cars, right? People come into town, they park to go to the businesses, and then they leave town. When we're talking about residential, now those, if and how and where residential is allowed in the future, that's a little bit different story. People do, living in the mountains typically drive a car. So we want to acknowledge that this is a historic context. These are historic sites that were built before parking requirements were, even mandated. And so being able to respond to the changing conditions over time is important. So we'll go through some scenarios just so you can see in general how much space parking is required based on uses that you put into a building. And then we'll talk through some best practices for how to solve some of these issues in the code. So to set this up, we're gonna, this black box in the left corner is, let's say, a typical average footprint. So if you have a 50 by 100 square foot lot, let's assume that the average footprint of a building on that lot is going to be 2,500 square feet. And this box represents that amount of space. To compare apples to apples, we're just going to swap out uses. So for this scenario, we want to look at how many parking spaces, and then you'll see the required parking spaces per your existing code here on the right. So if, let's say it's a mixed use building, you've got ground floor, commercial uses, but for this purpose, let's just look at let's say you put 3 apartments upstairs. Based on your existing code, you need 2 spaces per unit plus 1 guest parking space per 5 units. So that would be a total of 7 spaces. And you can see these are relative scale wise to this. So it's, you know, about the same amount of space would be required for parking than for the use. If we look at maybe a lodging use, hotel rooms, so they're a bit smaller, maybe we can get 6 hotel rooms up there. Per your existing code, that's 1 space per unit with 2 spaces for a caretaker, so a total of 8 spaces, so it's a little bit more. Going to commercial uses, looking at office parking requirements. So if you had 2,500 square feet of office, you would need to put in 10 spaces. So it's a little bit more demanding in terms of parking requirements for office, but similar to residential or lodging. And same for retail. So these are spaces that, you know, have customers in and out through the day, and there's not necessarily a big parking demand, but per your existing code, if this box were all retail, you would need to provide 8 spaces of parking. So you can start to see how the amount of space for parking is equal to the amount of space program wise, and how you can imagine that not a lot could ever be built on these tiny lots because of the parking requirements. The last use, which is pretty eye-opening, is if the use were a restaurant. Now 2,500 square feet is a huge restaurant, especially for Minturn, but just so that we can compare apples to apples here, let's assume that a restaurant goes in here. Your current code says you need 1 parking space per 6 dining seats, which if we convert that to square footage, it would equal 48 spaces. So this is just an exercise to, you know, put into your minds the amount of space that parking requirements take up. And I'm not saying that they're not important to have, but I will say that they are a little onerous for, quite onerous for a downtown, especially a historic downtown. So what can we do about it? We're going to go through just a few more slides here. So what can we write into the future code to deal with parking, you know, not ignore it, but also not be so onerous. So here's a list of you know, options to explore. We could, you know, continue to require residential and lodging to be parked to code or with slight modifications, acknowledging that residents or guests who stay overnight long periods of time will have a car. You could reduce required parking ratios for commercial uses, you know, looking at similar peer communities, kind of, we'll do some research. But this is to incentivize what you want to see. So if you know, I think the #1 priority, right, was commercial retail entertainment uses. shopping and dining. Well, if you want to see more of that, you have to address parking requirements because it can't really be done under your existing code. Some communities have switched to parking maximums. So instead of setting a minimum requirement, like this site has to have this at least this many spaces, you could let the market decide and let each individual lot determine how many parking spaces they think they need, and the rest could be utilize public parking. You could, another thing in these historic contexts is exempting historic buildings or buildings of a certain age that change use or are modified to, if you change an existing building's use. So if a residential structure went to a commercial structure, that would trigger all of these parking requirements, which would be impossible. So what this does by exempting historic buildings is actually incentivize their reuse rather than, sometimes it's a matter of, I can't park the site, so I'm just going to demolish this building and start over. So I think this is an important one to consider in terms of incentivizing reuse. Exempting ground floor uses, so those uses that people come and go throughout the day, they typically park along the street or in public lots, that could be something that you could look at, is just, not requiring any parking for the ground floor use, but requiring it for any floors above that. And then finally, allowing shared parking. So currently the code allows it within 100 feet, which isn't very far. That's like one adjacent lot. But if you expanded that, it could open up opportunity, and you could allow spaces that are open during different times of the day to maximize parking so that parking spaces don't sit empty. And so Madison, I think we're okay on time. Let's do this poll.
Okay.
We might skip the next ones. So we have a poll here that Madison will pull up asking which of these parking regulations are you most likely to support?
Okay, we're at about 50%.
Might take more time for people to read through these and
Okay, we're at about 70%. I'll give everybody about 15 more seconds. Okay. So it looks like the majority of people pay, or well, not the majority of people. The winner or top listing was all of the above at 47%, with the second highest being exempt historic buildings at 31%, and then reduced commercial parking ratios at 14%.
Great. Okay, so this is really helpful when we start to look at those parking requirements. Just a couple more slides here about other parking tools. You may not think you're here. Minturn is there yet in terms of paid parking, but so there's certainly peer communities, case studies. I just finished a downtown plan for Idaho Springs, who recently implemented a paid parking program, which has been really successful and helped them pay for a lot of improvements. Manitou Springs, Glenwood Springs is looking at one. The benefit to managing parking with enforcing payment, and it can start very low, or it can also just be during certain times or days or seasons. It doesn't have to be all the time, but it's just something that we want to throw out as tool to consider. Maybe you're not there yet, but just something to consider for the future. What it does is it creates more turnover. People aren't inclined to park as long. They'll get their errands run and then leave and leave that parking space for someone else. And the other thing that's really important is that employees then do not take up parking spaces for paying customers. If you're not there yet, something else to look at might be more just time restrictions and better enforcement. So expanding the area that is currently time enforced, time restricted, and making sure that you enforce it to control for spillover and parking in neighborhoods. And again, that would create more turnover and not allow employees to take up those paying spaces. I'm going to go on to the next slide here. Then there's something we're calling demand reduction policies, which is basically changing behavior. It would, reduce parking demand by allowing and incentivizing people to walk and bike and drive less. And so a couple things that do that by nature is just that those mix of uses, diversity of land uses, and density. The more people that you have living above shop fronts, they're not going to drive to downstairs. Obviously, they'll just walk, so they don't need a parking space. Improving transit access, so thinking about shuttling to and from Dow Junction, or improving frequency and marketing of eco-transit, and improving those first and last mile connections. So if somebody gets off the bus at Dow Junction or somewhere else in town, helping them get to the 100 block easier without having to drive. Another way is urban design and wayfinding signage. So basically design more comfortable streetscapes and people will walk further. So you have the public lot there north of town, and some may think it's a little far today. It's really not. For some people that are maybe not as capable, I understand that's important to have ADA spaces, but for people that are comfortable walking, if the experience is a comfortable one and desirable, people will walk further. And then just clearly directing people that I wouldn't know that public parking is available because there's no signage telling me that it exists. And finally, just managing curbside. So those parking spaces that are along the curb, really formalizing loading and unloading areas so that on-street parking can be used for parking. Clearly display and enforce your rules, and then have a program in place to promptly clear snow. So with that, I'm going to save the rest of the time here, about 15 minutes for any questions or comments. It can be about parking or anything we've talked about today. We just wanted to provide this last few minutes for anyone to voice, give us any concerns or ideas that you have.
Tom, Richie?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to call your attention to something I think is very misleading regarding parking. And that's when you said that, it's one parking space for 6 seats. As an example, the Minturn Country Club has 150 seats. Our requirement is 28 parking spaces. You were basing it upon 50 square foot per seat. And you also said that most restaurants, which I agree, are not more than 2,500 feet. However, us in the saloon are far greater than 2,500 square feet. And anyway, it used to be one parking place for 4 seats. And that was changed back in the 80s or late 80s, early 90s, with the advent of Suburbans, large vans. We then got taxi companies, and then later we got the Echo service. Now we have Uber and Lyft and all that stuff. So the parking requirements were lessened back in the 90s from 4 per seat to 6. One parking place to 6 seats, which was great. And I can remember vividly taking pictures in my lot and given them to Jerry Bumgarner, who sponsored the ordinance to get it changed from 4 to 6. But I don't know where you got 48 parking places. You know, that's makes people think that it's really alarming that we're never going to have enough parking in Minturn. Like Doug McLaughlin always said, who was on my first landlord, if people want to eat at your restaurant, Tom, they will find a place to park. That was true back in 1982, and it's true today. So parking is not the biggest issue. It's getting people into Minturn to eat at restaurants and shop. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, thank you for your comment. It's great to hear from a business owner like you. The visual that we displayed is really to express how onerous the parking requirements are. I'm not saying that's how many parking spaces are needed. I mean, you can tell us, right? You said you sent pictures of your parking lot, probably not full, but
no pictures of Suburbans and vans. And I said, we don't need 6 anymore. Okay. But, and the other thing is we used to pay $800 a month into the public parking lot over there. And the only one that really needed the parking lot was the saloon because they have no parking. Okay. Whereas the Minturn Country Club, when McLaughlin owned all the property, we have enough spaces in the 100 block to accommodate our requirement. That's it.
Okay, Ken?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Regarding parking and the last survey option, you did not even leave an option to leave parking requirements as they currently exist. I just want to point that out. So your survey seemed biased to reducing parking requirements. One other thing, the last parking survey that was done for the William Street lot was done a long time ago. I do a regular count on how many cars fit in there, and it is way less than the previous survey. It's important that the new survey comes during the middle of the winter when there's snow on the ground and it's chock full of Suburbans and SUVs and trailers with snowmobiles on them. There's very little capacity there. So we need a more realistic assessment of what we have. And my one last comment has to do with overall development and building heights. If we raise building heights in the 100 block, that will financially incentivize developers to come in and turn our 100 block into someplace like Edwards. They'll buy Hawkeye's house, they'll buy all the houses on the east side all the way to Toledo. They'll buy up everything because we're going to let them build a 3rd floor. So I think that's something that we have to think. You asked us to think about the future, 10 years, 20 years from now. If we incentivize the developers, they're going to buy up every lot. Hawkeye's house will be gone. The little greenhouse next to him will be gone. Everything will be gone and everything will be overdeveloped. So I just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Larry?
Thank you very much. I appreciate Ken's comment very much. I think that's everyone's concern, but I also recognize what Tom has shared from the country club. Being the owner of the Scarab, over 3,000 square foot retail commercial space, I'm on the side of Tom. We never use near the the requirements that are made from customers. We do, however, have staff that will park, and I think that your paid parking is a great incentive to have them park further away. And a lot of the strategies that you presented, comfortable walking space to the parking lot, I think those are wonderful and really help incentivize locals to park elsewhere, including many of the residents on the 100 block. So I feel like restructuring parking it's very important. And I also wanted to comment that my partner and I, we own Helen's House, Minturn, which is right downtown, and it has been identified as a lodging, but it's really more than that once we put in the Agora space and allowed for community use there. And we certainly hope to continue to be in support of allowing that to be used by the public in the local restaurants. We feel like it's a great program. But I wanted to comment on the regulations as it pertains to the short-term rental, where that particular home is required to have 3 parking spots. Since we've been operating a short-term rental, I think there's been only one time when there actually were 3 cars of the many guests that we've had come there. And more often than not, it is a 1 to 2 car parking demand. And I think that Ken's point of we need to have a realistic review of what our parking demands are essential, because the parking regulations that we have now obviously don't apply to what Tom was sharing from the country club, or for what the Scarabs demands are with a 3,400 square foot retail space, or with the short-term rental. All of the regulations are prohibitive, and thus is limiting entrepreneurs to want to come in and develop. And then if you don't offer something, I hate to go against what Ken was saying, it doesn't always have to be a big developer. You have a lot of entrepreneurs who are very willing to try to do something, but it's important that we don't put up regulation that stops economic development. And parking is one of those big issues. And I think that you guys have listed quite a few opportunities to help solve that problem. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Are there any other hands up, Madison? We do have one last poll.
I do have 4 more hands raised.
Okay. All right. Let's quickly go through those and then we'll end with the last poll.
Okay. Tom Sullivan, you have the ability to unmute yourself.
Hi. One thing I wanted to mention was that, tandem parking, I think, is currently permitted in the 100 block, and tandem parking really doesn't work, especially when you have 15-foot alleyways. And it also showed when the 2 buildings that have been proposed, one on the mattress company and one where the shack house is, they put tandem parking in that then cut way into the retail space. And so you'd have these tiny little retail spaces to satisfy the code, but they were really unusable because they were so small. So something has to be done that we don't have that problem where these massive buildings and it's all parking behind little retail spaces. So I don't know how we get around that, but I think that we've got to acknowledge that the primary use for the 100 block is retail tax generation, not residential or anything else. That the primary thing is for retail tax generation, because developers are going to come in. The rents are very, very low in Minturn. They're not going to build commercial rentable spots. They want to build apartments that they can sell for $1 million a piece. And that's not what is beneficial to the town of Minturn. What's beneficial to the town of Minturn is building retail space that's functionable. And that's the way our code reads now. And I think we have to remember that that is the function of the 100 block, is retail and restaurant space, not residential space. We have residential space, we don't have the parking for it, and it's going to cut into our retail businesses.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Elliot?
Hi, I'm actually Elliot's wife, Abby. Yeah, I just wanted to jump in. I think it's really great to hear from a lot of business owners, especially because there's like real world experience there. I actually used to work at the Minturn Country Club, and even though I live in Minturn, I admittedly drove. I think I really liked the idea of like making the walk from that parking lot more enjoyable. I don't know if that's the right word, but like if there were lights there or something that made it look a little nicer, I probably would have been happier parking a little farther away and walking to my car in the middle of the night. Not that there's a high crime rate in Minturn, but I'm just a nervous Nelly, and I'm sure there are plenty of other people who have the same thought process when parking far away from a place at night, which is sort of silly, but it is what it is. I also think, I think the development of the 100 block, it is important to have both residential and commercial, because we also have a housing crisis in our valley. So yes, the tax dollars are super important, but also it's important for the people who work here to have a place to live. And I know obviously parking's an issue, that's why we're talking about this, but I'm sure there's a way we can come up with some sort of solution. I also think the idea of paid parking, even at a low rate or first 30 minutes free or whatever, would be really productive, and then could also help fund the projects of like making it a nicer walk to that parking lot or whatever. So all interesting stuff to talk about. I think really especially important to listen to business owners of the 100 block. That's it.
Thank you, Abby.
And that brings up just a quick point that we are pulling together a group of business and property owners to help guide us through this decision-making process moving forward. So we will continue to touch base with them on this and the DCI Challenge Studio project. Okay, we are at 8 o'clock, so I understand if you have to leave. Let's take 2 more questions, then we're going to do a closing poll and we'll get you out of here.
Okay, Ken, you have Ken Halliday, you have the ability to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Great conversation this evening. I just have a question for the team there. You guys see a lot of different towns. Can you give us some context? If we're looking at a 20-year horizon, the transportation, autonomous vehicles, et cetera. I know I'm involved with some other projects that have been looking at these aspects. What do you see the thought leaders of other towns thinking about as they look forward to parking demands, particularly as it relates to restaurant retail? Thank you.
Yeah, we don't have our parking expert here, so we do have Fair and Piers on our team who's conducting the parking study, and they are experts in multimodal transport. And I won't even try to speak to autonomous vehicles, but I think, you know, as urban designers, we always, you know, keep in mind, again, designing at the human scale. And we do see the impact of urban design affecting how people will walk further. We see, you know, you're in Minturn, there's a lot of mountain bikers and bicyclists as well. So I think human transportation and walking and biking will only get better over time. But again, I can't speak to future transportation modes. But we will be, our expert Fair and Piers is working on the community plan. So community-wide, we will be having these conversations. So stay tuned.
I also just want to chime in and mention that Eagle County is working on a regional transportation authority, which would change up public transportation options within the county. So please, stay tuned into that conversation. I think it's going to be on the ballot this year, and that may change how transit service works in Minturn. So if you're interested in that conversation, please get involved.
Okay, the last person, Tom.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Tom Sullivan and Larry Stone. Great comments. One thing I'd like to say about what Tom said, if a developer comes in and builds new retail space, new restaurant space, the rents will go up drastically. And I can tell you for a fact, most of us that are in downtown 100 block cannot afford Edwards rents, Avon type rents. I will bet money we would have nothing but a revolving door of retailers and restaurateurs. That's one thing. Number two, as a gentleman, and I've seen on the question and answers written, everybody's bad mouthing Edwards. Well, Edwards is vibrant. I remember when Edwards was nothing but a pasture, and Edwards surpassed Minturn in retail and sales tax revenue. And, our valley floor in Minturn is quite different. We all got to recognize that. However, it's vibrant. And the only way you're going to get that is by going up so they can sell retail on the bottom and residential on top. To make the numbers work for any developer, that is going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, then Minturn will be the same way it is today, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. Okay.
Okay, thank you. We did want to hear who we're speaking to today. So we do have one last poll just to get an idea of how many are residents of Minturn, how many own businesses. So let's close with that poll. City staff is always available if you have follow-up questions. I think Madison's email is in all of the communications. So we appreciate all of you participating tonight, and we hope you will stay involved in the community plan. And if you can take this last poll, and then we'll let you finish your evening.
Okay, I have 100% participation on this poll. And just to give everybody a little snapshot before y'all start logging off. It looks like 47% of people live in Minturn, with the follow-up being working in the 100 block or represent a board or commission. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody, for participating. That was great. Gabby.
Thank you, everybody.
Jane, Ellie, thank you so much.
Have a good night, everybody.
Bye.